Most people won't make it to the end of this story, but if you do, you might never open your door the same way again. I'm not the type to scare easily. I've lived alone for a while now. I know every sound this apartment makes. The slow creak of the pipes when the heat kicks in. The distant murmur of late-night traffic filtering through my windows. The way the floorboards shift just slightly when I move from one side of the room to the other. I don't jump at shadows. I don't panic over small noises. I've always told myself that if something ever felt off, I'd know. But that night, something was different. It was 3:03 a.m. when I first heard it. A knock. Not loud, just a single deliberate tap on my front door. The sound was so faint, so precise, that for a moment I wasn't even sure I had heard it. Maybe I had dreamed it, just the tail end of some forgotten thought twisting into reality as I drifted awake. But as I blinked myself into awareness, staring at the ceiling, a strange unease settled into my chest. I reached for my phone, the screen casting a dim glow against the darkness. 3:03 a.m. I lay still, listening, waiting. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that isn't natural, the kind that feels thick, like the world is holding its breath. I tried to shake the feeling off, tried to convince myself it was nothing, but then another knock. This time, I was sure. I sat up, the last threads of sleep vanishing instantly. My ears strained for any other sound. Footsteps? Rustling? Breathing? But there was nothing. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant whoosh of a car passing outside. I didn't hear movement in the hallway. No one fumbling with keys. No one talking or whispering just outside my door. It was just the knock. I hesitated before getting up, a slow unease settling into my gut. My mind was already supplying explanations. A neighbor coming home late, someone knocking on the wrong door, maybe just a sound from another apartment echoing strangely through the walls. But none of those explanations felt quite right. The knock had been too deliberate, too precise. I stepped carefully toward the door, avoiding the floorboard that always creaked, moving like I didn't want whoever was out there to know I was awake. I don't know why I didn't turn on the lights. Maybe some part of me didn't want to be seen. Maybe I was afraid of what I might see. My breath felt slower, heavier as I reached the door, hesitated, and then leaned in to press my eye against the peephole. The hallway was empty. Just the dull yellow glow of the flickering overhead light. No shadows, no movement. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The air in the hall felt different, even through the thick barrier of the door. Too still, too unnatural. I waited. 1 minute, 2, nothing changed. I exhaled, feeling the tension in my chest ease just slightly. Maybe it really had been nothing. A trick of the mind, a sound from somewhere else that my half-asleep brain had latched onto. I shook my head, exhaling a quiet laugh at myself. I was being ridiculous. I turned around, already thinking about how stupid this was going to feel in the morning, already picturing myself laughing about it when I told a friend. And then it happened. A knock, not from the front door, from the back door, the one that leads to my balcony. My third-floor balcony. My breath hitched in my throat. The first knock had come from my front door, a place that made sense, a place where people were supposed to knock. But the second had come from the balcony. My third-floor balcony. I stood there, frozen in place, my mind scrambling for an explanation for anything that made sense. A bird? The wind? Maybe something had fallen against the railing? But deep down, I already knew. It wasn't any of those things. The first knock had been deliberate, purposeful, and this one, it was the same. Something had knocked, something wanted me to know it was there. Then it came again. A knock, slow, measured. A sound that didn't belong. A deep, crawling unease spread through my chest, my body instinctively recoiling. but my mind was already trying to rationalize a branch, a loose shutter, a trick of acoustics, some distant noise bouncing off the walls. My pulse pounded at my temples, sharp and rhythmic, as if my own body was trying to warn me. I turned toward the glass door leading to the balcony. The blinds were partially open, just enough to let in slivers of the outside world, the deep navy sky, the dim glow of the streetlights below, the ghostly outlines of distant rooftops, but nothing else. I reached for my phone, my fingers gripping it so tightly that my knuckles ached. My first instinct was to turn on the lights, to flood the room with brightness, to push away the dark corners where my imagination was beginning to conjure things I didn't want to see. But something in my gut told me not to. Instead, I stepped closer to the balcony door. Carefully, quiet. The air in the room felt wrong, heavier, like something unseen had crept inside with me. My bare feet barely made a sound against the floor, but I felt every step. Every tiny movement felt like an invitation for something to react. A slow, creeping chill crawled up my spine as I approached the glass, my breath so shallow I could barely hear it. I peered through the opening in the blinds. Nothing. Just the railing, the distant rooftops, the streetlights flickering below, casting long, lifeless shadows against the pavement. The wind barely stirred the trees. The city beyond felt almost unnaturally still. Nothing was there. I exhaled shakily. Maybe I was just hearing things. Maybe it was the wind playing tricks on me. Maybe it was a loose fixture, something knocking against the building in a way that just sounded like it was coming from my balcony. Maybe a knock. I felt my heart stop. This time I saw it, a shadow, something standing just outside the glass door. The moment was so brief, so impossibly quick that my brain almost refused to process it. But I had seen it, just for a split second, just long enough to register the outline of something tall, unmoving, waiting. My pulse slammed against my ribs, my breath caught somewhere between terror and disbelief. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just stood there, body locked in place, my mind screaming at me to do something, but before I could react, before I could even decide whether to run or to look closer, I turned my head slightly, just enough to see again, and it was gone. I didn't sleep that night, not after seeing that shadow outside my balcony door, not after hearing the knock that came from 3 stories up, where no one should have been. I lay in bed, my phone clutched so tightly in my hands that my knuckles ached, my breath slow, controlled, too afraid to make a sound. My eyes stayed locked on the glass door, my mind racing, replaying that split-second glimpse of something standing there, something that had vanished the moment I had turned my head. My body was exhausted, but my thoughts refused to slow down. I kept waiting for another knock, another flicker of movement, another moment that would confirm that this was real. But nothing else happened. No more sounds, no shifting shadows, no footsteps retreating down the hall or across the balcony. Just the still, oppressive silence stretching through the night, pressing against the walls, filling the air like something unseen was watching, waiting. Hours passed like that, my body stiff, my ears straining against the quiet, my heart refusing to settle. The world outside the window slowly turned from pitch black to a dull, gray haze. Then, finally, mercifully, to morning. By the time the sun had fully risen, I had almost convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe it had been a trick of the light. Maybe a cloud had moved just right, casting a distorted shadow against the glass. Maybe the knock had been something shifting, something falling, something that made sense. Maybe I was just overtired, my brain playing tricks on me after too many nights of bad sleep. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. That thought was comforting in its own way, because if my mind had created it, then it wasn't real. If it wasn't real, then I had nothing to be afraid of. But something inside me wasn't convinced. That afternoon, I bought a camera. Just a cheap, motion-activated one, the kind meant for baby monitors or home security. Small, basic, but enough. I set it up facing my front door first. If someone was messing with me, if this was some kind of elaborate prank, I'd catch him. Then, after a long hesitation, I set up a second camera. This one faced the balcony. I stood there for a long moment after placing it, staring at the tiny, unblinking lens, my reflection distorted against the curve of the glass. The thought made me uneasy. Cameras were supposed to make people feel safe, but as I stared at that little black circle, all I could think about was how much I didn't want to see what it might capture. That night I went to bed feeling a little better. The cameras were watching now. If something happened, if something was out there, I'd have proof. I closed my eyes with the phone beside me, the camera feeds just a tap away, a silent reassurance that I wasn't alone in this. I told myself that tonight I would sleep, that whatever had happened the night before had been nothing. Then 3:03 a.m. came, a knock. I jolted awake. Knock. I didn't move. I didn't get up. I didn't check the peephole. I didn't creep toward the blinds like I had before. This time, I just reached for my phone. I opened the camera app, my fingers unsteady, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The front door feed popped up first. Nothing. The hallway was empty. Just the dim, flickering glow of the overhead light, the long stretch of silent, lifeless corridor. I stared at the screen, waiting for something to change. Nothing did. I swallowed hard and switched to the balcony camera. The screen flickered once before loading, and my blood ran cold. There was someone standing outside. Not just a shadow, a figure. Tall, completely still, facing the glass. My mind went blank. My body locking in place, my breath caught in my throat as I stared at the screen, unable to look away. This wasn't like before. This wasn't a fleeting glimpse, a trick of the light, a moment of doubt that I could dismiss in the morning. They were there, standing on my balcony, looking directly at the door, not moving. No details, no face, just a dark, solid silhouette, standing so still that for a second I thought the camera had frozen. It hadn't. The trees in the background swayed gently. The streetlights flickered like they always did. Everything was moving except for them. They weren't trying to break in. They weren't pacing or knocking again. They were just standing there, waiting, watching. I tried to zoom in, but before I could, the screen glitched. A sharp, high-pitched burst of static buzzed through my phone's speaker, the image warping, twisting, the shape of the figure breaking apart in ways that didn't make sense. The darkness swallowed them in fragments, shattered their outline into something jagged and unnatural, like the camera itself was rejecting what it was seeing. And then, the feed cut out. When it came back, they were gone. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I stared at the camera feed for hours, heart hammering in my chest, watching, waiting for any movement. But after that glitch, after the screen flickered and the figure disappeared, nothing happened. The balcony remained empty, the city beyond it still and lifeless. The hallway outside my apartment stayed just as I had left it, silent, undisturbed, as if the night had swallowed the moment whole. At least, not on camera, but I still felt it. That awful, suffocating presence. The weight of something unseen pressing against my skin, settling into the space around me, wrapping itself into the air I breathed. Like something was still watching me, like something was waiting. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that I was tired, that my nerves were getting the best of me. But I knew better. By the time the sun rose, I had made up my mind. I was leaving. This wasn't normal. This wasn't some prank, some misunderstanding, some series of coincidences I could brush off in the daylight. Whatever was happening, whatever this was, it was wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. And I wasn't going to wait around to see what happened next. I packed a bag, moving fast, my hands unsteady as I shoved clothes into my duffel. I didn't need much, just enough to get me out of here, away from this apartment, away from the feeling that something was coming. I didn't care where I went. I just needed to go. I grabbed my keys, moved toward the door, and then I froze, because something was waiting for me outside. Not a person, not the figure from the camera, a note. A small, folded piece of paper placed neatly on the floor just outside my door, with 3 words written on the front. Check the footage. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to leave, to run, to never look back. But my hands were already moving, my fingers already reaching for the doorknob, already pulling it open, already stepping back inside, as if something was guiding me. I locked the door behind me, sat down, opened the app, pulled up the footage from last night, the front door camera. I rewound to 3:03 a.m., and my blood turned to ice. The hallway was not empty. There was someone standing outside my door, tall, motionless, facing the peephole, watching me. But it wasn't a stranger. It was me. You made it through this one. But the next story? You might not. Goodbye for now.